Oh, great. Okay, mine for you. All right. Well, welcome everybody. 7 o'clock. So we're gonna get started here. Sorry, you don't have the handouts, so just gonna have to pay attention or listen. If you want to use some scratch paper, feel free. I got it. We got extra paper over there if you need it, so that's fine. Today's reading is actually from Second Maccabees, and this is verses chapter 12, verses 38 through 46. Maccabees is rather unique in that we only find Maccabees. Well, I shouldn't say we only find Maccabees. Maccabees is part of actually the Catholic canon. So, in other words, if you go to other denominations outside of Catholicism or Orthodoxy, Maccabees may be like an appendix, or what they call the deuterocanonical book. It wouldn't be part of the actual regular canon. We use this book in liturgies. And I think you'll see the reason why we're talking about this tonight as we're talking about things like purgatory, last things. Okay? So, in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Judas rallied his army and went to the city of Adullam. As the seventh day was approaching, they purified themselves according to custom and kept the Sabbath there. On the following day, since the task had now become urgent, Judas and his companions went to gather up the bodies of the fallen and bury them with their kindred in their ancestral tombs. But under the tunic of each of the dead, they found amulets sacred to the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. So it was clear to all that this was why these men had fallen. They all therefore praised the way of the Lord, the just judge who brings to light the things that are hidden. Turning to supplication, they prayed that the sinful deed might be fully blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened because of the sin of those who had fallen. He then took up a collection among all the soldiers amounting to 2,000 silver drachmas, which he sent to Jerusalem to provide for an expiatory sacrifice. In doing this, he acted in a very excellent and noble way, inasmuch as he had the resurrection in mind. For if he were not expecting the fallen to rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he did this with a view to the splendid reward that awaits those who had gone to rest in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Thus he made atonement for the dead, they might be absolved from their sin. Judas rallied his army and went to the city of Adullam. As the seventh day was approaching, they purified themselves according to custom and kept the Sabbath there. On the following day, since the task had now become urgent, Judas and his companions went to gather up the bodies of the fallen and bury them with their kindred in their ancestral tombs. But under the tunic of each of the dead, they found amulets sacred to the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. So it was clear to all that this was why these men had fallen. They all therefore praised the ways of the Lord, the just judge who brings to light the things that are hidden. Turning to supplication, they prayed the sinful deed might be fully blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened because of the sin of those who had fallen. He then took up a collection among all the soldiers, amounting to 2,000 silver drachmas, which he sent to Jerusalem to provide for an expiatory sacrifice. In doing this, he acted in a very excellent and noble way, inasmuch as he had the resurrection in mind. For if we were not expecting the fallen to rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he did this with a view of the splendid reward that awaits those who had gone to rest in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Thus he made atonement for the dead that might be resolved from their sins. Judas rallied his army and went to the city of Adullam. As the seventh day was approaching, they purified themselves according to custom and kept the Sabbath there. On the following day, since the task had now become urgent, Judas and his companions went to gather up the bodies of the fallen and bury them with their kindred in their ancestral tombs. But under the tunic of each of the dead, they found amulets sacred to the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. So it was clear to all that this was why these men had fallen. They all therefore praised the ways of the Lord, the just judge who brings to light the things that are hidden. Turning to supplication, they prayed that the sinful deed might be fully blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened because of the sin of those who had fallen. He then took up a collection among all the soldiers, amounting to 2,000 silver drachmas, which he sent to Jerusalem to provide for an expiatory sacrifice. In doing this, he acted in a very excellent and noble way, inasmuch as he had the resurrection in mind. For if we were not expecting the fallen to rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he did this with a view to the splendid reward that awaits those who had gone to rest in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Thus he made atonement for the dead, they might be absolved from their sin. All right, to give some context to this, the book of Maccabees, actually there's two books of Maccabees. And both the books are actually happening, they're actually historical books, happen after the Babylonian exile, around 600 BC, 500 BC. And they're actually about the actual Greek occupation of Israel. So for those who know history, we understand that after the exile, some of the Jews came back to Israel, reestablished the temple. But then shortly after that, there was this guy named Alexander the Great, right, who basically went east and conquered all the land all the way up to about India, right, even into India, which included Israel. After Alexander's death, though, he kind of broke up the empire, and these different generals became these kings, which started this lineage of kings of this Greek nobility that were ruling these areas. And one thing the Greek king did in Jerusalem was set up a temple to Zeus, desecrated the temple. So we've heard of the feast of the Jewish people called Hanukkah, right? Does anyone know what Hanukkah actually was? It's found in Maccabees. And what it was Judas Maccabeus. That's where Maccabees come from. His name Judas is the person we're talking about here, not Judas Iscariot, Judas Maccabees, who was fighting against the Greeks to kick him out of Israel. And after they conquered Jerusalem, they reconsecrated the temple. And that's what Hanukkah celebrates, the kicking out of the Greeks and the reconsecration of the temple, which some would call the third temple, right? So here there was a battle with the Greeks, and the Israelites were triumphant. But then what happened was the Sabbath happened, so they couldn't do any work. And the bodies are lying out in the field, they're starting to smell. And so they get a group together and start picking the bodies and bring them back home to bury them. And lo and behold, they find these amulets on the bodies of the slain that were idols, right? And so that's a violation of the first commandment. Well, that's why they die. Now, what's interesting here is Judas takes the approach of like, well, let's give a sacrifice for them, for their soul, because, hey, we don't know where the state of their soul is. Maybe God will have mercy on them. Maybe when the Messiah comes, he'll take them into heaven. So we should probably pray for them now so they can actually be there eventually. This is where we actually find the scriptural basis of purgatory. And so this aspect of like, okay, well, if we're in a state where we're not perfected, because Jesus tells us in the Gospels, we must be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. Well, the problem with that is most of us won't die that way. We're going to have some kind of attachment to this world. We're going to have some kind of maybe, hopefully, venial sin, not mortal sin, that we've kind of are living with, these temptations that we struggle with. Well, it seems like we need to perfect ourselves somehow. And that's what purgatory is directed towards. And that's kind of what Judas Maccabeus is recognizing here. It says at the end of that scripture, well, if he did this with, understanding that these people are in hell, it's kind of superfluous, doesn't actually do anything. But if there is an aspect of like, well, these souls may be somewhere else other than hell, not in heaven yet, well, then we probably should pray for them. Because their souls are still in the state where they're probably moving towards that true end. So that's kind of the context of the story of Maccabees. Yeah.
Not that the Bible is chronologically in order, would this be the earliest point of showing somebody praying for souls? Like after they're dead and hoping that something happens at a later date? Like obviously he's looking for something in the future and he doesn't know for sure, though, correct?
Well, there's other references, like for instance, in the book of Kings, Elijah has this vision of these bones, right? And he prays over them, they come back to life, right? Well, there's an aspect of maybe purgatory there, that there's a state of rest that eventually is leading to this final end we're called to. So this may not be the first, but this is probably the most explicit we actually see in Scripture, the actual praying for the dead, right? An understanding of the soul that lives beyond this world. And even then, at the time of Elijah, when it comes to temple worship, we always see these kind of divisions of the ruling class of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And after the exile, we have these two kind of parties. The Sadducees who didn't believe in the life after death, and the Pharisees who did. And it was always a great debate among the scribes and the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, about is that actually true or not? Jesus puts that into perspective, right? He says that there's the story about where the Sadducees come to Jesus and says, hey, there's this woman who married 7 brothers, right? Well, whose wife will she be in the afterlife, right? And Jesus said, well, that's a foolish question, right? Marriage doesn't exist in the afterlife. God is not the God of the dead, he's God of the living. And so there is a life after death that we're all called to. Kind of put in the Sadducees in their place. But yeah, this is kind of the first time, especially in the Old Testament, we see something explicit about this. There's other references in the Old Testament. This is the most explicit one, I would say. Grace?
Stupid question. So, before Christ died for us,
Mm-hmm.
and was resurrected, up until that time, did all souls go to some holding place before they can be judged?
Yeah, so we'll talk about that as we talk more about we're going to talk about the last things tonight. And last things we understand are heaven, hell, and purgatory. We'll talk about that. So yes, we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. Your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, heresies? Did I explain that pretty well, Father? Does that make sense? As a resident theologian here. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so in many ways, the discussion we're going to talk about of discussion we had last week about the church. So when we talk about the church, we were talking about the people. And in the context of the things to come and what the church is, we understand the church manifests itself in three different ways, which is rather maybe, scary in some ways. The church triumphant and the church suffering. So all those forms of the church characterized by the state of the person living in those places. So, for instance, the church here on earth would be considered the church militant. We're still fighting the fight. We're fighting the fight against evil, right? We're trying to bring the kingdom of God here on earth. We're in it. We're in the military. We're going forward, right? We got that mission. The church triumphant will be those who've achieved their goal. They won, right? They're with God in heaven, right? They are what we would call divinized, meaning they're with God forever, right? And then we have this place called the church suffering, which kind of relates to what we just read in Maccabees. So when we think about these things, we understand that to be these three states of existence. And it's important to put it in that context because oftentimes we think of like these aspects as places, and they are, but they're not just those. They're actually beyond those. So they're beyond mere extension, right? So I can reach out and I'm saying, I'm in this room. Okay, is there something like heaven that's manifested in this room? In some ways, yes. But it's probably more helpful to think of heaven, hell, and purgatory as a state of existence, a state of being. So right now, many of us in this room are in a state of existence of living here in St. Louis at this particular time, of growing, of maturing, of discerning, maybe, right? These are all states of being, states of existence, and we find ourselves at this very moment. Heaven is like the fulfillment of, that's the end goal. That's the epitome of all of this, right? You have a place that like hell, which is like the antithesis of all this. And then you have purgatory, which is this state of kind of moving on to that final end. So I always think it's helpful to put in that context. Now, of course, I'm going to talk to a kindergartner. I'm not going to say that, right? I'm going to try to put it in a different context to understand in a better way. But we'll start with heaven. So heaven is the ultimate reward and the destiny of all people. So the church talks about this universal call to holiness. What does that mean? Well, universal call to holiness is that we're all, no matter who we are called to be with him forever. To be in the state of existence, of this highest existence, where there's no need, there's no desire, it's all fulfilled in God. And what that looks like, we don't really know. We've had glimpses of that from maybe particular saints. But again, personal revelation is not dogmatic. It's not doctrinal. We can believe in it, but there's an open question about that, right? So is it a place? Yeah, but it's not just a place. Again, what is it like? It's interesting that Jesus never tells us. He gives us analogies about what heaven is like. He equates like things like a kingdom to things of like a level of perfection. But he doesn't actually explicitly tell us like what the experience of heaven is, probably because we would lose our minds if we actually knew what it was, right? There's a method to that madness that, in other words, if we knew what heaven truly was like, we probably would end our lives right now, which would not be good, right? That wouldn't get us there, right? And that's a problem. That's a contradictory, okay? So what does Revelation or what does Scripture say about it? Well, we have these particular books that talk about, the end. Like, for instance, Ezekiel, Daniel, the book of Revelation gives these visions. But that's the thing we have to understand. These are just visions. They can be interpretive. They're interpreted through the person actually having the vision. So like when Daniel or even John in Revelation talks about a vision of a seraphim or of a cherubim, which is frightening when you think about it, right? About this kind of like figure of a wheel of eyes, or this creature that has like the head of an ox and an eagle and a lion and a human, and its body's covered by wings. What do we make of that?
Always got to have some fire in there.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, so is there a literal aspect of that? Well, sure, there's a little aspect of the first actually experiencing that. But what does that mean interpretively? You know, there's not a definitive interpretation of that. You can hold a lot of different things when we talk about those things. When we talk about what we must believe as Catholics, though, is that we must believe it exists. So to that point, is there a level of universalism where everyone gets in? What do we think?
Could be. We don't know because we're not God.
Right. So in other words, it's probably good for us to hope that everyone is there. But is it realistic to believe that everyone is there?
No. I don't think so.
John, you're about to say something?
Is there a universal, like that no matter what, everybody's going to.
Right. No matter what I do, no matter who I am, no matter what actions I take in this life, oh, God will forgive me. He'll let me come in. Well, you know, there's an aspect of there called presumptionism, right? And that's something even like in the sacrament of reconciliation we want to avoid. So in other words, let's say I go murder 3 people, rob a bank, and star in a porn film. And I think, you know, it's okay, I do this. I'm going to go to confession tomorrow and I'll just be absolved of it. Well, you're adding another sin on top of that called presumptionism. Because what happens if you get hit by a bus before you make confession? Well, my intention is not necessarily I want to be forgiven because of love of God. I'm doing all this bad stuff with the thought, oh, I'll just go and do this. I'll be fine. There's still a level of disconnection. The fact that I'm still maybe keeping myself from that grace in some way.
There didn't seem to be
True contrition.
For your
Right.
actions.
Right. And so in that regard, if the contrition's not there, I can't be forgiven. Now, there are no atheists in foxholes, right? That's an old adage, right? So that when we're faced with mortality, is there a level of like kind of grief for my sin? Is there a level of like, oh Lord, I'm sorry I did this to you, or sorry I hurt other people around me? And will God give us that grace? Well, of course He will. We trust in that mercy and love. But is it possible that someone rejects it?
Yeah.
Of course it is. And that's the great tragedy, that somebody would. It's possible that somebody would. So again, we hope that everyone's there, but we also understand that there may not be everyone there. So what can we definitively say? Well, we can simply say because of the resurrection of Jesus, what He revealed to us, that heaven is a thing. It is a state of existence. It is where we're destined to, where the hope is fulfilled, right, in all things.
Where I wanted, where you said universally, I'm like, well, yes, to all man and all mankind.
Right. Well, in this context, universalism just means like everyone's getting in, no matter what we do.
Now, no matter
So
what,
I can be a great sinner. I can never repent, and God's going to forgive me. Oof.
He's going to forgive you, but whether you
But the thing, if I don't repent, though, I can't be forgiven. Right. So that's the idea: is that I can just do whatever I want, and I don't have to worry about the consequences, and God will just forgive me. Let's be careful on that.
I don't think that is true.
Now, what we want to say though is the church is in the business of affirming those who are in heaven, but the church never condemns anyone outside of heaven. Never has the church officially said, this person for sure is not there. All it says is we're pretty sure this person is, which comes out of discussion we had last week with the saints, right? Questions about that? So it's important to understand too that heaven is not just a natural fulfillment of all our desires, right? It's not just like I have food I need. I have, it's not that like, heaven is like a Dairy Queen blizzard, right?
That is heaven.
Right? In some ways, there's glimpses of heaven in that, but heaven is so much more than that, right? There is a great philosopher from the 2nd century who say that God and heaven are greater than anything that can be thought. So not just the physical needs are met, it's that every need, spiritual, intellectual, emotional, even physical, are met in heaven because we're there with God. That's all we need.
Since we can't comprehend it, the Dairy Queen thing sounds pretty good.
Exactly. Maybe that's a good, maybe physical aspect of our experience of that. But when we eat a Dairy Queen Blizzard, we still are unfulfilled, right? We'll be unfulfilled again.
And then my teeth hurt.
And your teeth, right? Yeah. Or I eat too much if I get a tummy ache or something, right? So again, there's aspects of that where heaven is just a perpetual state of that. So let's talk about the other side, hell. This is the farthest state away from God. And again, there have been many saints that had visions of hell. As a matter of fact, one thing I did in seminary was St. Ignatius of Loyola has this thing called the spiritual exercises. It's a 30-day silent retreat. And so I had the opportunity and the privilege of going through the exercises when I was in seminary, and it was a wonderful experience. I would say anyone who can do it should, or I would advise you to. Getting away for 30 days is hard, and I wouldn't start with that. Start with maybe a 3-day, maybe work yourself up to an 8-day. And if you can make an 8-day, you can make a 30-day, right? But a 30-day retreat, the second, what this consists of is you're in silence, so no unnecessary silence, and you reflect on certain aspects of Jesus' life, things of like the Trinity, and it usually consists of like 5 holy hours every day. So you're contemplating, you're putting yourself in the presence of like the Trinity, you're putting yourself in the presence of Jesus Christ, and you're experiencing with your senses like, what does it feel like? What does it sound like, right? So it's more imaginative, which is kind of interesting. I never thought I could do that, and it was kind of fascinating that I could. But the second day, we actually are contemplating all day about hell. We are putting ourselves in hell. And we're imagining, like, what does it look like? What's the smell? What am I hearing? And I'll say one thing that was kind of scary for me is that one of the hours we actually do at the middle of the night. We wake up in the middle of the night and go and have this reflection alone. I will say that was probably the most terrifying experience of my life. And the reason it was so terrifying is because all day I had this guide with me that was kind of taking me through these stages of hell and showing me these things. Almost like a Dante, Dante's, you guys ever read Dante's Inferno? Dante, he wrote these books about heaven, hell. Again, it's fiction. It's not like he's had this vision. It's really just more of a fiction. But he talks about these aspects of hell, and he's actually Virgil, the Roman philosopher, is taking him through hell, right? And he's experienced all these things, and so it was kind of similar for me that I had this guide, but I never saw who the guide was. And it wasn't until that very last reflection I realized the guide that was with me was not of God. It was somebody else. And so when you're put in that perspective, I never saw flames in my visions. I never saw these aspects. But there have been like these revelations to particular saints that kind of experience these things. But again, we have to make that distinction between what's divinely revealed and what is personal revelation, right? That again, we can maybe believe that these saints have had these experiences. Maybe that's how it's like. We don't necessarily have to. What does Jesus say about it? Well, he kind of equates certain things, and it's kind of hard maybe to interpret because there can be aspects that Jesus is talking about hell, but also he's talking about purgatory. Is there a difference between those two? We'll talk about that in a second.
So are the mystics just personal, or is there some mystics that
Personal.
have church approval?
Anything that has not been definitively decreed by a council or by the Pope, we'll talk about the Pope later today, will be considered personal revelation.
Okay.
And particularly for instance, if like a saint, like let's say Teresa of Avila, right? She had these great mystical visions of heaven. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because she's a saint, we can say, well, that's pretty good, reliable, that she probably has these visions. There could be some truth there, but I don't necessarily have to believe that. I can maybe have a pious devotion to St. Teresa of Avila and say, I really believe that's what she saw, and I believe that's what it's like. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But you can't say that everyone needs to believe that.
So then a mystic is just
It's personal revelation.
anyone.
Anyone.
But there are some mystics that have been like notarized by the church, right?
Well, you say notarized.
Well,
I would say
what is that
have been.
term?
So there've been. So when we talk about like things that are personally revealed, let's say even like a vision of the Blessed Virgin, or like we talked about earlier with like Eucharistic miracles, right? The church always says you can believe it, but you don't have to. It's not that you must believe it. And there's a distinction there, right? Because to call myself a Christian Catholic, I must believe certain things. I must believe the dogmas of the church. I must believe the definitive teachings of the church. When it comes to these other aspects, the church says you can if you have your own reason to do so, but you don't have to.
Okay.
And so, these visions of heaven and hell, okay, I could believe that, but I can also say, I don't know. Maybe that person was drinking too much that night, right? Maybe that person was on some kind of, medicine. There could be other explanations. I'm gonna reserve judgment. That's totally okay. That's totally fine. You can call yourself Christian and Catholic and still do that. John, you're about to say something?
Well, I can even believe that Jesus is trying to tell Ken something, and maybe, but he doesn't want.
Sure.
And
Sure.
what I mean? I believe that Ken saw that, and Jesus told him.
Right.
But that might not be what Jesus wanted to be.
Right. And that may lead to an understanding of like, well, okay, when we talk about our personal experience of heaven, maybe that's different for each individual. But what's common there is that God is there. We are with him, right? We don't have any desire or need.
And we're there to praise him.
Exactly. But also receive from him too. Be one with him.
I can't remember where I read something, but it was kind of the same thing of like heaven is like an understanding of your true purpose.
Yeah.
And like fulfillment of that. Like,
Yeah.
Like, hey, we all strive to find our purpose now, but
Right.
we're not perfect.
Right.
So we fail at
Right.
our true purpose.
Yeah.
Because we're not perfect.
Right.
But when we're in heaven, at his grace,
We are perfect.
here's our purpose.
Exactly.
We fully understand it,
Yeah.
and we're in his presence. And
Yeah.
That's heaven. Because you have your purpose.
Yeah.
You need nothing else.
Yeah. No, I think that's true, Marty. Yeah, I think that's a good point. So yeah, we want to kind of make that understanding, but definitively speaking, we won't really know. We won't know until we're actually there. Right.
So a mystic book that's been written by a saint that's long dead, if they have the is it
Imprimatur.
that
So,
just
okay,
means
all right.
that there's nothing.
We're getting into the weeds here, but that's good. So
Right? Is that what that means?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, so what Renee is talking about is there are certain books that are published that would be written by like Catholic authors, like for instance this one here, right? Sometimes what happens with these books is they're given to particular bishops to review, or a theologian to review, and then to a bishop to approve. And what happens sometimes is on the inside cover, if the theologian and the bishop has actually looked at it and said, okay, we've reviewed it and we looked at all this, at the bottom, after all this publication information, there'll be what's called a nihil obstat. That's given by a theologian that says, well, there's nothing in here that's against what the church teaches, right? So everything in here is actually in line with what the church teaches. Then a bishop goes further and says, yes, this has been now approved by the magisterium, what they call an imprimatur, an imprint, to saying that we officially say this is a good book to read as a Catholic and engage your spirit in your life to grow, right? So usually if it has an imprimatur or a nihil obstat, that's a good indication that it's probably okay. I say probably because it's hard to gauge in that regard.
You might have a stamp happy bishop.
Yeah, because a lot of that's open to the personal interpretation of the bishop. And even though it has that, it has to be also brought up against what the church teaches and everything else, right? So I say that with a grain of salt because not every book that has the nihil obstat and the imprimatur may be in line with that, especially in more modern times. So just be careful, okay? If you have a question, talk to a priest.
But it's a good start.
It's a good start. That's probably a good indication it's probably okay. Okay. So even with that, but even then, right, all that's really saying is there's nothing here that's actually against what the church teaches. Nothing contradicts. And if it is talking about something the church doesn't teach, it has to be definitively taught, right? So like we talked about earlier about whether Mary died or not. That's an open question. So if I write in a book all these things about Mary and I say, I believe that Mary died and here's my reasons, I can still receive the imprimatur because it's not against what the church teaches, and there's nothing in there that actually contradicts what the church teaches.
But you say in there, I believe not Mary. It's
Well, you can even put it in that aspect and say, like, Mary did die, and here's the reasons why. All that saying is like there's nothing here that contradicts what the church teaches. Now, if a council comes out and says Mary didn't die, well, hey, that book is going to be thrown in. We're going to remove that. Okay, we're going to take that out of commission. It's done, right? So a lot of these are dependent on the time, which is why, as an author, it's always good not to stray too far. So all that being said, let's get back to hell. Okay, so many theologians and philosophers talk about hell as an act of love. Now that may seem very contradictory because, okay, we're talking about like this level of universalism. Well, why would a just and loving God condemn anybody to hell? All right, let's look at that in a perspective, right? It's not necessarily that God or Jesus condemns anyone to hell. The thing about hell is that it's freely chosen. And that, again, is the great tragedy of hell, that at my judgment, seeing Jesus for who he is, seeing God for who he is, seeing all these great things that he's done for me, and how maybe I've even offended him, and having that sorrow, I can still not choose him. And God is so loving and good, he's going to respect my choice. He's going to let me not choose him, which is an act of true love. When we talked about this when we started all this, right? We had this question about free will. We talked about the Trinity, right? That could God have just made us robots? Yeah, he could have, which would have been a great act of his power. But because he's love, he gives us free will to choose him or not choose him, which one would argue is the most superior act of love. To actually love someone completely, you have to give them the option not to love you back. And so if God, who loves me infinitely, gives me the will to not receive that, his love is going to be so powerful, he's going to say, I'm going to let you make that choice. And notice, could he just annihilate me right there by not choosing him? He could. Which, again, would be a great act of his power, but not a great act of his love. And so in that regard, he let me choose not him for eternity. That's the tragedy of hell, is that anyone who's there, if there is anyone there, we hope there's nobody there, but if there is someone there, they're choosing it. So how do we get there? How do we avoid it? Well, we'll definitely talk about that. We talk about, the what we call the Decalogue, the moral teachings of the church, the moral teachings of Jesus. But we avoid it by choosing the good. Growing in that habit of not sinning, of choosing the good, of growing in that desire for those things that come from God, rather than things that come from the earth, or even worse, the things that don't come from God at all. Who's there? Again, we don't know. We hope nobody. But again, is it probable that there are some people there? Yeah. I've often said, I kind of hope that hopefully when I get to heaven, if I get to heaven, that I hope the greatest sinners are there. I hope there's like Adolf Hitler there. I hope there's like, Stalin there. I hope there are these figures that have been, tyrants and horrible in their life here on earth that are there. Because if they're there, there's a pretty good shot for me.
Judas.
I hope Judas is there. Right? If he can get there, anyone can get there. Right? So again, what can we definitively say? What do we have to believe? We have to believe it exists. We have to believe there's a Satan. We have to believe that there is a place, a state that's farthest away from God that we choose. Okay. We talked earlier about Maccabees. Well, maybe there's a state where we're not in both, right? Maybe because I'm not perfect, because maybe I do repent of my sin, maybe in the presence of Jesus, I actually do want mercy and contrition. But hey, wait a minute. I'm still not in a state to actually be in heaven. I'm not perfected yet. Well, it seems there should be then a state where I can be to get that perfection. And that is what purgatory is. So oftentimes in media, purgatory is depicted as this like divine waiting room, right? All right, I'm waiting for the judge to judge me. That's what purgatory is. Is that what purgatory is? No. It's not a divine way. It's not a way station. What purgatory is actually a temporary state of existence. Anyone in purgatory is going to heaven. Nobody in purgatory goes to hell. Everyone that's in purgatory is destined for heaven. That's important to understand. That's definitive teaching. That even though I may sin, I'm not in a state of perfection. I have these attachments to this world. I need to be purged, which purgatory comes from. I need to be that removed from me. The state of purgatory does that for me. So if Jesus says we must be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect, ooh, that's a problem if I'm not there when I die, which I probably will be. So what happens? Okay, we have a state where God's love endures that you actually also choose to go to. You know, some theologians depict purgatory as this aspect of once we're judged and Jesus accepts us and says, come, share my master's joy. It's us who say, Lord, I'm not worthy of this. I need to be perfected. I need to be purged of these things because of my love for you. It's still an act of love. We call the church suffering because, well, when we purge ourselves of things, there is a suffering involved with that. There's a something good I'm giving up for the good, higher good. That's what suffering is.
So, but now you just say that's another choice. Like I'm with you as on when I die.
Yeah.
That I'm going to see Jesus.
Yep.
Jesus is either going to send me to heaven, to hell, or to purgatory. Now, he'll say, do you trust in me? Do you believe in me? Your last chance. To be then, you would have to say, yes, I do believe in you, or I reject you. If I reject you, boom, down to hell for eternity.
Yeah, so I think like what Marty was saying earlier, right, is that there's this aspect of like where God's grace can perfect me, right? And that's why there's a question about like, well, how long does that like last? How long does purgatory go for? Well,
And then I don't believe that they are part.
okay. Sorry about that. All right, so
When you say purgatory is a choice.
well, what I see. So in other words, can Jesus perfect me right there and then with His grace? Of course He could, right? He has that ability and authority. But also too, does that mean that like purgatory is also like instantaneous? Is that the purgation I go through by receiving that grace right then and there to be perfected? Maybe that's a form of purgation, right? Maybe purgatory, right? And so in other words, there's nothing really definitively taught about like what that is, because purgatory is outside of time and space, just like heaven and hell, right? These are things that are not bound by these things of like time and space where, 1,000 years here on earth, well, what is that, right? If God and everyone in heaven sees the past, present, future all at once, well, okay, maybe it's instantaneous. And there are also biblical references there too. Like for instance, some theologians would say, okay, well, maybe purgatory is like in the parable of the prodigal son, that when the son returns to the father turns to the son and runs to him. In that regard, purgatory may be this like anticipatory, action receptivity of that grace, of that embrace of the Father. And how long does that last? I don't know. Is it like Christmas morning, like this anticipation of running downstairs and opening up presents as a child? Is that something like purgatory? Maybe.
Is it a confessional?
It's a confessional, right? Yeah. I mean, we don't know. There's not a definitive teaching on what it's like again, because it's outside of our reality. It's outside of time and space.
No, but the reading did say that he prayed for an atonement for the sins.
Right. So that goes back to aspect of like merit, right?
Yeah.
So those that are in purgatory, their job is done, right? They've fought the fight. They're gonna win,
But they can't do anything about.
but they can't do anything about where they're at, right? We can help them with that by praying for them, by meriting for them.
So that's why
Aspects.
to me it would make no sense that they go right up. If Jesus and Mary are asking.
But even then, the merits we do on earth, what does that mean in eternity? The merits that we do here, are those eternal? Well, yeah. Right? If I go, let's say, have the intention of my grandmother receiving a plenary indulgence, I do all the things that are required for that. We haven't really talked about indulgence, have we? We haven't really talked about that yet. Okay. A plenary indulgence, what that does is just removes all the temporal attachment from sin. So when I sin, I affect God, I affect other people. And what it is a way of like giving justice to those who can't give justice. And so in that regard, well, let's see who this is now. Who's this? I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So in that regard, I can do things here on earth that have that eternal effect because those people are now not bound by that, right? They're not bound by the things, the time, the space of this world. So I can affect them right away
By offering your
by offering my indulgence for that person, right? Yeah. So there is kind of an aspect of eternity involved with the things we do here on earth that affect those in purgatory. So maybe once someone gets to purgatory, that merit has been built up for them to where it's instantaneous. Or maybe it's a million years. We don't know. Right. So what we can definitively say is that it is a place of a temporary state of perfection. And anyone that's there is going to heaven. So in other words, shoot for purgatory. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Don't shoot for heaven.
Yeah.
It's fine for me.
Set your bar pretty low.
Yeah.
When 20 minutes ago you wanted to be shot on the altar and go straight up.
Oh, hey, I'll take that too. I mean, either way, right? Hey, God's will, whatever happens, right? So there we go.
I
Right.
just want to make it
Yeah.
up there with it.
That's right. That's right. All right. Any questions about this? Yeah, Grace.
All right, so if I understand correctly, we can choose purgatory.
I mean, I think so again, that's not necessarily definitively taught, but I think that makes sense reasonably. That if I'm in the presence of Jesus in all his glory and infiniteness, and I look at myself and say, boy, I am not worthy of that. I need to go through some training. All right. In the same way of like, let's say,
It's like you can't.
yeah, like I went to Camino last year, right? It would have been very difficult for me to go on Camino if I haven't like trained for that moment. So if we equate like Camino to be like heaven, right? Well, the purgatory for me was like walking around the block and getting ready for that trek, right? To receive the grace God wants to give me. So I chose to do that out of love for God and the reception he wants to give me.
I'm just thinking, some people naturally are very hard on themselves.
Yeah.
Some people aren't so hard on themselves.
Right.
And if you're choosing and you're not so hard on yourself, does that mean you could get to heaven faster than this person who might be very hard on themselves, but maybe they try to live a good life?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the point is that, the purpose of our life is to try, right? And so I'm trying really hard not to sin. I'm trying really hard to maybe not to be hard on myself. Okay, at the point when I die, knowing that about myself in the presence of Jesus, even if he says, oh, look, you come into your master's joy, good and faithful servant. And even though Jesus still knows this about me, he may even know that, you're not perfect. And out of love for me, I think it's good for you to do this. I still out of love have to choose that and say, you're right, I need to go do that. I need to take that time to rid myself of that. To
God
freely
knows
choose
your
you.
heart, though.
Yeah.
God knows your heart.
Yeah. But even then, can he just give me the grace right now to like overcome that? Well, of course he can. And is that something of purgatory? Well, yeah, there's kind of love, there's a perfection involved with that.
Well, when I meet Jesus, I hope I'm smart enough, if he's welcome me home, I'm smart enough to accept it and go. No.
Well, and again, I think Ken, that's still an act of grace, right? That's still an act of grace. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm not gonna look that gift horse in the
Right. We call that wisdom. All right, so how do we actually get to these places? Well, what we understand, what Jesus reveals is this level of judgment, that he will be a just and merciful judge that sits to judge us. And like Renee said, he knows the character of our heart. He knows who we are more than we know ourselves. And even being the fact that he became human and did what he did, there's a great, reality of him understanding that and even still doing what he did, knowing what we do to him. And in that grace and mercy, he's going to not judge us as harshly as we maybe judge ourselves. Going back to what Grace says, I think Jesus might be more soft on us than we're on ourselves in that regard. Because he does know our faults. He does know where we fail. He knows where we're challenged and still loves us anyway.
That's
So-
so crazy. He's crazy for that.
Well, I mean, I've often said this.
God.
I've often said this, and I think I may have said here, I'm not sure. I can't remember how often I've said it, but like when you look at the relationship we have with God, it's rather abusive.
Yeah, it's very toxic.
We abuse him every
He's
day.
way too good for
I
us.
know, right? And but he keeps on
He's
stepping his
so
back.
us.
He keeps on taking his back. He never
I
stops
know.
doing that, right?
I know.
Where from everyone else would be like, sorry, we're done. Right? But that's just not of his nature. That's just who he is.
We accept him for who he is.
That's right. Amen. So we understand that there's actually two different events in time of judgment. There's our personal judgment when we die. We're going to be before Jesus. He's going to say, come in, or, well, do you reject my love? Okay, bye. Right? There's also what we call the final judgment. So the difference is the final judgment happens at the end of all things. Because we're created, because the entire universe is created, it also is going to have an end. That'll happen in time. In which case, all of creation will be judged by God. Even the human beings that are around at that time. And the angels, for that matter. Right? Once we experience that judgment, though, that's it. We're judged. Whether it be in the final judgment at the end of time, which could happen tomorrow or an hour from now or a billion years from now, or at the moment when we die here on earth, right? Jesus will say, come, go, or if you want to be perfected, here's the door for that, right? In some ways, do we experience both those things, though? So some theologians talk about the resurrection of the body. So as Jesus was resurrected, his body and soul came back together. Our body and souls, too, will be together in heaven. We will have our bodies again. Now, what that looks like, we don't know. When we talk about the glorified body, there's many different theories about that from different theologians. Like, for instance, St. Thomas Aquinas thought your body would look like your body when you're 21 years old.
Oh, I'm good with that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, the thought there would be like that's kind of the state of usually 21. That's probably the state of your physical perfection, right? Yeah. He then recanted on that though, and said it was your 33-year-old body because that was the age of Jesus when he died.
Well, it's better than like a child.
Yeah, sure, right. But again, these are his personal thoughts; they're not definitively taught. Other theologians talk about that maybe your body will exhibit the ways you glorify God. So in the same way, Jesus, he glorified his Father through the markings of his hands, his feet, and his side, the crown of thorns, the lacerations, which is maybe why he wasn't recognized after the resurrection. When he came to Mary Magdalene, what's the first thing Mary Magdalene thought?
He was a gardener.
It's a gardener. That's not Jesus. He looks too worn. He looks too, lacerated. That can't be him. Until he says her name, that she realizes. And maybe that's also why he wasn't known to the travelers to Emmaus after the resurrection. These two travelers are going back to their own town, and Jesus comes with them and starts walking with them, and they don't recognize him. And the thing about that story that people don't realize, that was his aunt and uncle, Clopas and probably his wife, Mary, who was at the crucifixion, who witnessed Jesus being crucified. They didn't recognize him for 7 miles. How long does it take to walk 7 miles? 3 or 4 hours. If I'm with someone for 3 or 4 hours, you think I'd recognize them by now, right? They didn't. When they recognized him,
Breaking
the Eucharist. In the Eucharist. Ugh. Interesting. So maybe that's what our glorified bodies will look like too. That our bodies will be resurrected in the way that we glorified God.
What if you don't make it to 33 years old then?
Well, I think Jesus would know what your body will look like at 33,
Oh.
right?
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, sure. But again, that's also not definitively taught. It could be.
Right.
Maybe get the pick.
I think personally, it's better the latter interpretation of that. Your body's going to signify your glory. And for like the martyrs, what does that look like? Well, beheading, and it's rather gruesome. But in our life, where these wounds are ugly and gory and disgusting, they become beautiful and glorified in heaven. I think there's something to that. And again, that's not definitively taught either. We don't really know for sure. But it kind of makes sense to me. Father, do you know any other interpretations of that by any chance? Okay. I think there's others, but I mean, those are kind of the main ones. Yeah. Good. So do we experience both? Yes, in some ways, but once we're judged, whether it becomes the end of our life or at the end of time. Right.
Do you think that it's like when you're in purgatory, if you do take purgatory or choose that route, do you think that's heaven will be better for that individual? Like it's like a golden ticket type thing.
Well, you can't. I don't think you can say necessarily that heaven's better for anybody because it's a fullness of everything. It's not like it's not like my heaven's better than your heaven. It's just we're in heaven. We're there. We're made it. We don't have any desire or need for anything else. We're like God.
Your cup will be full.
Right. I think though, and again, I think when we talk about purgatory, it's hard to determine like what that state is because, well, can God just give us that? Well, of course He could. Maybe that's what He does.
I mean, it could be like an introductory class for like divine understanding.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's
Well,
job onboarding videos.
Well, yeah.
They said you're doing a certification class for divine understanding.
Well, and there's another interpretation of purgatory that may be something like that, Marty. But like, maybe purgatory is we go through our life and saw what would have happened when we made the choice that God wanted us to choose.
No, I hope it's not it.
Right? Maybe that's the love of purgatory. It's like here's the person you could have been on earth.
Yeah, or
right?
those things of like, hey, this is
You would have chosen
where you faulted.
Yeah.
But that's what. But the divine understanding is that thing of like being able to understand is like. But some people go through life and they think they've never made a fault, and
right.
They're living this thing because it's like this is that chance for you to have
Yeah.
a true understanding of that.
Yeah.
Once you get that, then you can accept.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there might be some truth there, and the theologians might that interpretation as well.
So your heaven could be your capacity to
receive
Jesus in His fullness.
Yeah.
So it could be different for everybody in
Could
that
be.
sense,
Yeah.
but everybody's
Right.
receiving what they can possibly have.
Right. Yeah.
They're becoming a divine being.
So I'm kind of confused what like the final judgment is and what happens after that.
Okay, the final judgment is the end of all time.
Like
That's when the end of all the universe happens, right?
okay.
So as the universe has a beginning, it also is going to have an end, right? That's the
So then,
final
like, are we
judgment.
all like dead?
Yes.
Yeah,
Are we in heaven?
hopefully.
Hopefully.
Right.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
That's
It's
the
just
goal.
at that point, everybody who was currently alive is judged.
Right.
So okay, so what if you're already in heaven? Do you still have a final judgment?
No. Yeah, once you're that's where the personal judgment is. So if
He changes
here's the thing,
mind.
Let's say
By the way, you
no,
were
that's
not
good. No.
here.
This is actually a level. It's actually a level of chronology, right? So in other words, if I die tomorrow, Jesus is going to judge me right then and there, right? But the other time might happen billions of years from now, right? My judgment's already happened.
Okay.
But those that are still alive billions of years from now, they will be judged at that moment.
So if the world ends tomorrow, we're
Mhm.
all gonna have the final judgment,
Correct.
and we're not gonna have the personal judgment.
It's the same in
Well,
that
all the
regard.
ones that are.
Yeah, it's the
Oh,
same,
Kind of
right?
like are gone.
At the end of the time, the personal and the final judgment are the same,
Okay.
The point is that it's the last judgment.
right? Ever. Yeah.
It's kind of like we're on a bus. If you get off here, that's your judgment. If you get off there, that's your judgment. We all stay on the bus till we get to the depot, then that'll be our judgment.
Yeah, yeah.
Guys, I hope we're in line together.
Well, I don't because I might die late before you do.
I hope we're all in
You
line
know,
together.
I mean, you know, still,
I
yeah.
don't know if I want everyone to watch my judgment.
Yeah,
Amen.
Well, and sometimes that can be very scary because we look at like Jesus in Matthew 25, for instance. Jesus talks about the final judgment being like he's going to line up all people, and on one side he's going to put the goats,
Right.
on the other side the sheep. He's going to go to the sheep. Is like, come into your last joy, you who saw me naked and saw me hungry and thirsty and in prison and sick, and you tended to my needs. And they're going to be like, what are you talking about? We never saw you, Jesus. He's like, if you help the least of my people, you've done it for me. Oh. So what does that mean for those who are out there on the freeway at the exit ramps and end ramps, right?
They use it as a job.
Well, here's the thing, right? Does that mean though, and we'll get into this, we talk about the Decalogue. We talk about, the 10 Commandments and what that requires of us and the teaching of Jesus. But is there a level of dignity that would be me giving that person $1 if I know that person's going to spend that $1 on something that's not good for them?
If he looks homeless.
Yeah, right. I mean, so again, there has to be a level of prudence involved in the individual with that, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't help anyone ever. We should, right? And then the other side is going to go to the goats and be like, "Go away, you cursed! You saw me hungry and didn't help me, and you saw me thirsty, and you saw me naked, you saw me that needed, was sick and was in prison. And you didn't do anything for me." They're like, "What are you talking about, Jesus? You didn't do the least, my brothers and sisters. You chose that."
Mhm.
Ouch. Right. Again, charity above all. All right. Any questions then? Final questions about the last things?
Final question. That's funny. No
nice.
pun intended.
So is there an exception for people whenever they're getting their personal judgment or their final judgment who didn't have the opportunity to know Jesus ever?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so in the same way we talk about baptism by desire, right? So at the final judgment, let's say I've done good in my life. I've been charitable. I've been serving. I've looked out for people. That's inherently a desire for the grace of baptism. And God, because he's a loving, just God, he would give us that at that moment, right? But also, too, it's better to have sacramental grace because we can use that right away.
Yeah.
Right? We can actually do that now here on earth and experience that now. Sure.
I know people that try to live a very good life, but they don't believe in God.
Yeah, that would be a little more difficult because the question then, and again, this is hard
Maybe
for
they
us
will when they
because,
see him.
yeah, this is really hard for us because we're trying to judge things that we can't see. We're talking about the character of someone's soul. What do they truly know? What do they truly believe? Where is their heart really founded, right? Because only Jesus knows that. I don't know that. I can say, boy, it seems kind of weird. This person was raised even Catholic their entire life. It seems like they're rejecting the faith. I still can't say that they're damned because I can't make that judgment. I can say maybe it's better for them if they actually maybe try to grow in their faith or try to understand it better or maybe try to do other things. But I can't force that upon anybody, nor can I judge them for that.
Sadly, I know people who are mad at Christians.
Yeah.
Because they feel like they don't really live up to.
Well,
They reject Christianity because they want to be good.
Here's the thing that may be contradicting. So, in other words, if you're rejecting Christianity because of Christians, that's a problem for you, right? If you're saying the example of Christians are leading me not to believe in Christianity, I can understand that, but that doesn't mean that the things that the church teaches in Christianity isn't true. And if I'm trying to live my life in truth, I shouldn't necessarily worry about what other people are doing and just try to live the way Jesus wants me to live. Because the truth of the matter is, there's no such thing as a perfect Christian. None of us, all of us fall short. Other than Mary and Jesus, they're the only ones who never sinned. The rest of us do, unfortunately.
I think there's a way of thinking, and maybe to me it seems like it's kind of more prevalent. If I want to be really good, I'm not going to be like Christians who do that thing.
Good. Good. But also, too, what does Jesus say?
Right.
Right? If I want to be a Christian, I need to follow Jesus. What does Jesus say? Come to me, right? I've given you these great gifts, these sacraments, these teachings, these things to live by, and also to do. All of it. Not just one over the other, it's all of it. So, in other words, if I'm rejecting Christianity because of Christians, well, you're not unique. There's many people that do that, but also that's not what Jesus tells us to do. Jesus never said, well, follow me unless other people give a bad example.
So shame to dust.
Who is the example? It's not Father Madden or Archbishop Rosansky or Pope Leo or anyone else. It's Jesus.
Jesus is the example.
And maybe to a lesser extent Mary.
Well, it goes back to free will.
Yeah. But again, does that person understand? I mean, I can't judge that, right? Jesus knows better than I do what that person knows, what the person understands, what the person believes, what's going on with that person. And maybe for someone who has maybe rejected the faith out of maybe ignorance or lack of comprehension or lack of understanding, maybe that's part of their purgatory.
Or hurt.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe that's part of their purgatory. Maybe that's
Yeah.
that's going to be part of that for them.
But
Right.
you would hope that healing would come
Yeah,
from Jesus,
exactly. Yeah. So in other words, if you're asking, are those that have rejected the faith who maybe, know better, are they completely damned? I don't know. Nor can I say. Only Jesus would know that.
Well, that kind of reminds me of this girl, her sister had cancer, and she watched her sister, just disintegrate basically into death. And she was really mad at God. And she, didn't want to have anything to do with God anymore. But that just kind of told me she does believe in God.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
she,
I think, yeah.
is defiant.
I mean,
Doesn't want to have anything to do with it.
yeah, I mean, I think many people experience that. I think also too, unfortunately, like going back to the whole aspect of like Christians, well, boy, there have been a certain number of priests haven't been good models for people either, especially in the light of the sexual abuse crisis. And I would say people take that and say, because of that, I don't believe. And that's tragic.
All you can do is pray for that.
Right. But also unreasonable,
God bless us.
right? Because I can even understand if someone is a victim. I think what's interesting, though, is that many victims, though, have maintained their faith in light of it. That's kind of shocking. Yeah, I mean, if you think that actually that it's the people that actually use it as an excuse that actually tend to reject the faith because of that, who have never been victims of it. The victims of themselves, a good majority of them, still maintain their faith.
I think that's a lot too of the support process too, because like a lot of times people like grief and sadness and so forth, people don't know how to process that.
Yeah.
Usually it comes out as anger.
Yeah, I agree.
Because anger is the easiest
I agree.
emotion to have.
That's very true. Yeah.
It's that's the fastest, like some people it's very hard to be happy about something, but anger comes instantly.
And maybe that's part of the purgatory for that person, that they have to overcome that anger, overcome that stress, overcome that hatred, or that that sadness or that anger,
Right.
even at God. So in other words, it's open to anybody, and God will provide those opportunities for that person to receive that perfection. I think we have to hold that. Good. Okay, moving on to another aspect of talk about. about here. So when we talk about the visible church, so we talked last week about, the church is the people, which it truly is. The church is not only invisible, the spiritual aspect, it also is a visible church, is that we have a body that's found in Jesus, but also a body that is human, that is present, that is visible. And with any body, we have the body itself, the members, the organs, the hands, the feet. So the head, as we understand it, is given to the 20 region of Caesarea, whom the man is. There's Elijah. There's Jeremiah. Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter said in reply, Son of the living people, depart church and in heaven, and whatever someone that is the Messiah. Why is it significant? Because in ancient Israel, the person that had the most authority, the holders of the king of the power, was the one that let people in and let people out. He guarded. In that regard, Peter is not. He makes what is bound and what's not. Two, as with any legislation portrays ownership. In you, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound. Sorry. Have sounds. He's using the singular. Peter. He says, I will give you them. In other words, this is authority of other apostles, or what we call today the bishops of the church. That the bishops and those in union with them have the authority to understand that. Discussion with some of our brothers and sisters of the denominations, what that means. That where he got ordained. Last Supper.
They all got ordained.
Caesarea Philippi Laboratory. Anyone's been there, actually, it's actually at the mouth of the Jordan River. And the god of fertility. And when he's saying this to Peter and his apostles, he's talking about hell. That's what the people thought. You're the rock, prevail again. We will have a Judas. There are going to be many of them. The church that we call the bride of Christ. Again, it's not which was the meeting tent. There's always been this Aaron. Moses anoints him the high priest to minister. Right? So the high priest was for Israel, the body and the head. History. Okay, how has the Pope come about? Was it? Well, yes, but not. So back in the time, he actually named his successor. Does anyone know who was? Roman canon. Linus. At the time, why was Peter right? Rome burned, the Christians were upside down. He named Clement. We have this line of appointees all the way down up until about the time of about the hundreds. At that time, it was decided appointees, the Christian people, namely the clergy of Rome, would elect the new pope, elect their bishop. In Jerusalem, Alexandria, even Constantinople, they would elect their bishop. And they would actually turn out to be a really good pope, and actually a martyr too, right? Again, he was elected by the clergy. That went that way. Elp was actually a really bad pope elected. So John the Ninth, against the church, is interesting. Actually left, resigned the papacy.
Yeah, he did.
He came back, became the pope again. During that, and finally ended his life as a hermit.
Was he John the Ninth every time he was Pope? Or
Yeah.
Was John the Ninth?
Yeah, no, he was John the Ninth. He wasn't necessarily elected. What happened was the former pope died or resigned, so he came back and whatever. But regardless, he established what we now know cardinals. So, for instance, the very first time the conclave, which they called, that's when the cardinals get to vote, between the different many of them conclave and pick their person they wanted them to pick. There was actually two rival families at the time that were elected at the time of John II. I hope that ever though, even though they lived with what the church taught, never actually taught against what the church taught. It's okay to have concubines. It's okay to have sex out of marriage. It's okay to do all these things. Right.
Yeah, it was right.
But he never seen taught by the church. Did that. Which shows sure. He never taught. Very interesting. It depends. He's a pretty good dude. Has to be cast for that person for them to be elected. Deacon, the archdeacon of the college, comes as Tom. That John Duffy guy. He seems. John, got a good news for you. We got together.
Yes.
But it's still possible
Any Catholic man.
for the papacy.
Wow.
If when he's elected, he becomes the pope. Yeah, except
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. So that's how it really works.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, great.
Why are there cardinals over the age of 80? Is it because they have a
Again, the title cardinal, but also the main job of cardinal is to actually support and get together and they talk about it, which means you can establish churches, you can knock down churches, you can do some other things within the church guidelines that you have that jurisdiction. In 1854, this is the only thing that came from that Vatican Council. This is the Pope give an interview and say this is what we're doing, heading down in line with the teaching of the church. So it can't be over here. It has to be universal. So what does that look like? Okay, in that regard, dogmatic statement, it has glory entire church. But the Pope's authority is not necessarily global in his pastoral application. So what that means is, can Pope Leo go to Archbishop Rosansky and say, we'll work over St. Anne? You got to get rid of him. You got to send him somewhere else. Authority. No. The only one who has that authority is Archbishop Rosansky. Now can and can't do. Makes a statement and puts it out. Makes another encyclical and says, I think Catholics. No, why not?
Not a matter of
Opinion. There's the actual aspect of the soul involved with this. And he wrote that reason saying, and if Jesus didn't do it, we have no authority to do it either. Right? But again, these are already established. So in other words, the Holy Father won't make anything new. It's already been found. More modern invention, right? So we'll talk about this more when we talk about the commandments. We'll look at those things.
Even just during Mass with the, Brethren, peace be upon you.
Yeah.
With your spirit.
Yeah.
Like a kind of a similar thing. I interpreted this now this way.
Well, they were and they weren't. So in other words, these are actually retranslations, and they're more in line with the original Latin. They're not necessarily new, the Pope. So that would be something definitively taught, which is kind of a point of controversy right now, for those who don't know, with some of our members of the SSPX, because they don't of the church. Same thing with Martin Luther, Henry VIII. Same thing with John Calvin, Zwingli, all these reformers that are the same, didn't recognize the authority of the church. So with this comes understanding in those regions. There's a corresponding Catholic rite. One's in line with the Pope, The other one isn't yet. We're moving towards that. Praise God. After 1,000 years, right? This kind of gets what we're talking about, earlier with things like the order or the doctrines of like. It's kind of hard because there could be some people that celebrate the SSPX who don't necessarily. But when Archbishop Lefebvre broke away after Vatican II, he celebrated here at St. Anne is not a mass. Well, that's not. There's other aspects where it comes into the human person. In other words, religion should be forced on anybody. There should be a free choice. Understanding given by God to hopefully find Jesus and find their way to the Catholic Church. Openness to actually understand. Another aspect, since Vatican II, there's been a more conceited effort by the uphold what Jesus prays in John 17, that we shall be one as he and the Father are one. Namely, of the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church at some point, even within our lifetime. That wasn't there for 1,000 years. They're what they call sedificantus, meaning this SSPV is that there aren't many of them. As a matter of fact, there's only maybe like a handful of them right now in Kansas. Crazy, but either way, primarily.
It's ironic that it's 5 and 10.
There's certain aspects of SSP that Pius X was the last validly ordained pope. Now, hard to actually kind of pigeonhole these all because, like many Protestant groups, there's not like a difference. It's all.
I've heard that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I did about this. If you want to go back and look at those videos, feel free. They came from Vatican I, which actually is kind of ironic. Married clergy and experiencing marriages with another man, another woman, or even things like women. So if I were to go to Mass at the SSPX, it's still the Eucharist because they're there. But it's really, really illegal. It's highly illicit. To the point where I, as a Catholic, if there's any other choice, even going to I should box too, there's a level of Eastern Orthodox Church. So we should try to avoid these if we can. But if you find yourself on a Sunday morning, need to go into Mass, and the only thing available are these, okay. But just so you know, you should do anything else other than that if you can. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because these are not in line with or such where that's the only thing you can do. So, in other words, I was away from a Catholic church. Mass is going to end in okay, but I still have to understand even there, there's
No.
well, the question is to me, first off, understand, is that Jesus?
No.
No. Because they don't have validly or but could I understand that's not Jesus?
But you don't even have to go for that. You can just do a spiritual
Sure,
communion.
there's another Catholic in that crowd. The witness, we go up to the Lutheran Church and receives the communion there. Am I communicating to that other Catholic person it's okay to do that?
Yes, you are.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But you didn't tell them.
Well, wedding. You didn't know I was there, and I'm in the back of church, and you see me coming up to receive the Eucharist as a priest. I'm sorry, not the Eucharist, but communion. Would you be scandalized by that?
I would be.
I would probably try
I
to
would
trick
be.
I hope you would be, right? Because if you're like, well, Father, you should know better.
Right.
And I should.
Because I would say if you could do it, then it must be okay.
Exactly.
That's how I would interpret it.
So we want to be cognizant of those things. Would it be sinful? Not really.
Different from the Pope's actions not matching with their words.
No different.
So scandal
Means in this context, anything that leads me away from it's anything that leads me away from the faith, right? And not so much the person that's witnessing it, it's the person doing it. For instance, if I know for sure that celebration at the Lutheran Church is not the Eucharist for these reasons, I should refrain from going up there to do that. I've done it before. Actually, as a matter of fact, my cousin got married in the Lutheran Church, and I was in the back, and I was dressed as a priest, and I did not go up there because I don't know. I know there are other Catholics there. I don't want to promote that. If I weren't dressed as a priest, I still wouldn't do that because A, that's not the Eucharist, and B, if someone knew me and they knew I'm Catholic, I could lead them astray. I don't want to do that.
So, but the
If I do something that's against the church teaching as a priest, let's say I go take a concubine.
What's that?
It's living in the rectory with me, right?
Oh.
We're not married, but which has happened in the past before, right? So, that isn't as a matter that could be excommunicated me, not because of the scandal, but also because of the promises and the office I hold. So my bishop would make a declaration, says, Father Madden, you know you shouldn't be taking a concubine. I say, whatever. Okay. And there also has to be a warning with these things, right? There has to be kind of a level of that. There has to become dialogue. But what the bishop is saying is, you've excommunicated yourself. You have cut yourself off from the church. In order to actually get back into the good graces, you need to correct the thing that's causing you that separation. In that case, I say, hey, concubine, get out. Confession. I go back to my bishop and say, what penance do I need to do to be reconnected? And he, in his prudence, will determine that. So excommunication is never meant to be punitive. It's meant to be medicinal.
So like Martin Luther, as he was gathering his followers, was told, hey, you need to like stop starting your own church. And he was like, no.
Right.
And so then at that point he was excommunicated.
Actually, it was even worse. He said, well, you're no longer, I'm the church now. That's what he said. I'm not the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Right.
So they don't follow.
Right. So it's a way to determine, again, who's in the church and who is maybe in the shadow.
Is it, I guess, in a public way? Like,
Again, it's a public way of bringing about a medicinal solution, right? So in Martin Luther case, if you would have said, oh, man, you're right, I'm sorry. And you'd gone back to the Pope and says, I don't know what I was thinking, sorry. Okay. Why don't you go on a pilgrimage and come back and you'll be, but also you have to stop promulgating what you're promulgating. That's against what the church teaches. And what's funny about Martin Luther is if you look at the 95 Theses he put out there in, what was that, 1530, 1520? About 95 of them were Catholic. Actually, 95 of these theses are actually like, yeah, you're right. These are abuses that need to be corrected. And they were. The problem was Martin Luther decided to leave the church instead of staying there and helping. Because we have also good examples of those who did stick with the church and reform it, like St. Ignatius of Loyola. It's really, all these people stayed with the church to reform it, to get it where actually Luther was saying, you're going wrong. And they're like, yeah, you're right. Let's correct these things. There's other things he was promulgating. Is like, well, that's not anywhere found in the tradition or the teaching of the church. So if you're going to hold that, you're no longer part of the church. Good. So I included here this little kind of chart, and this kind of goes to just show you like where the where the churches are kind of. I don't know if I can scroll in or not. Let's see if I can zoom in. I don't know.
There, maybe?
Oh, there we go. Whoa, what the? Boy, this thing is all screwy. Let's say in the Chaldean Rite. The Chaldean Rite finds their roots actually in Israel, in Iraq, in the Middle East. And actually the celebrate Mass actually in the words of Jesus, Aramaic. So maybe one of the big distinctions is how they're priests to marry, but you have to be married before you get ordained. And oftentimes, those that are married will not be able to become bishops, but that may be a good blessing for them. Who knows? So I just want to show that because that's kind of shows the great family that we are in the Catholic Church. And that maybe, again, it's good for even Catholics to experience these different rites of how they work and what happens. And they're really beautiful. So I encourage anyone. We actually have the Byzantines here. We have the Ukrainian rite. Maronite.
the Maronites do Aramaic, correct?
More Lebanese. but they have Aramaic in it.
I don't know why, but me and Laura were looking into that, and I know that there's a church here that does an Aramaic service. I can't think of what church.
It actually could be St. Elizabeth, Hungary. So Elizabeth, Hungary actually has, they're bi-ritual. They have the Roman Rite and the Maronite.
Yeah, that's what I think. Maybe that's the number one.
Well, there's also a cathedral downtown called St. Raymond. They're also a Maronite Catholic.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah.
I know there's the one downtown we were talking like over Lent. Oh my goodness. All
Yeah.
this amazing food.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, St. Raymond's, they have something I think it's every
Every
week. Yeah, Wednesday, right. They have like a dinner.
It's like a full menu on their
yeah.
web page. It's
Yeah.
pretty impressive.
That's very good.
Or anything.
Anytime. Anyway, yeah.
And where is that?
It's at St. Raymond's. It's downtown. It's down just south of. It's like near South City. Like if you're like from the Arch, it's probably about 2 miles south from there.
Oh, wow.
That's still our area.
It's kind of
St.
by
Raymond?
St. Raymond's.
Oh, Raymond.
Yeah, St. Raymond's. Yeah, it's a cathedral. It's the Maronite Cathedral, and because they have their seat here in St. Louis, too. Yeah, and for these different rites, all there are different bishops, right? So there are bishops for all these different rites.
Right cardinal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, a cardinal is just a title, like what they call the eparch of the Byzantine Rite. Cardinal, so and so.
But all of the rights will be or maybe not, but
Usually, yeah. I mean, because again, it's the universal church, so they is represented by. But again, it's weird because these Western Rite ministers of they recognize the minister as the priest, the wedding. That's their canon law. Okay. Then are not. It's just different. I understand it's the actual people. Further than say, yeah, it's that, but also the thing that a Catholic. What? Oh,
I know that.
all right.
Unless we get an influx of
Any questions?